All right, Whiplash.
5, 6, and...
I push people beyond what's expected of them.
Why would you let him get away with what he did to you?
Because I want to be great.
There are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of In Case You Missed It. This is a show where we are going to talk about movies that we think maybe didn't get the recognition they deserved. Maybe you didn't see them, maybe you've never heard of them, that we think you should check out and just kind of give in our thoughts on them to kind of bring some awareness to some of our favorites. I'm here with my co-host Scott.
Heidi ho.
And my name is Josh. Today we're talking about the 2014 film Whiplash, directed by Damien Chazelle, starring Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons. It's a movie that we both really love. It did get some decent recognition, but it's not one that we think is talked about as much as it should be nowadays with just kind of the general population. It definitely has its fans and people that love it like us, but most people that you talk to maybe haven't seen it or have heard of it. So we think that it's definitely worth talking about. And if you haven't seen it, we definitely recommend checking it out.
People always ask you, like, since we're both in film, people ask what your favorite movie is. And first of all, one is not fair.
Yeah.
But I usually give people like a handful of movies that are like in no particular order, my favorites.
Yeah.
And this is always one. This is probably actually the first one I say. And you know what's funny? I think you and I have talked about how, well, we talked about when we were going to do this. We thought about movies that are great, but people didn't really see it. Actually, one piece of trivia I looked up for this said that this is the lowest earning film to get like a Best Picture nomination for an Oscar.
Oh, wow.
Which is true, but I looked it up and it cost about $3 million to make. It still made about $50 million. So,
okay.
That's some solid ROI. I'll take that.
Yeah. Wow.
And the funny thing is I've recommended this to people that I think aren't movie people.
Mm-hmm.
So my family, and everybody loves this movie. But even today I saw something where somebody was talking about like, the only things getting made anymore are sequels and remakes. I'm like, no, that's just the only things you see.
Right.
I think we're at a point where audiences need to meet people, halfway. So,
I've had the same kind of a similar experience with this. I'd say this is in like, if you'd ask me like to list like my top 10 favorite movies, this would be in there. And I know not a lot of people have seen it necessarily, but yeah, everybody who I've recommended it to has loved it. And it's just so well made.
Yeah.
On like every front. And being an editor, it's one of the most well edited movies I've ever seen. It just like gets right to the point. There's no fluff. There's nothing that shouldn't be there. Nothing that needs to be added, I feel.
Yeah.
Everything adds to the story.
Yeah. No, there's no fat on this movie.
No.
And as I'm sure you know, the movie was like shot and edited in 10 weeks.
Yeah.
Actually, it was filmed in like 19 days. And that as a result, you don't have time to add a bunch of fluff to it.
Right.
And actually, because you said it's so well done. And I think this is such a great example of kind of, there's no bad ideas. It's about execution.
Right.
But yeah, this is a movie that's so well, it's executed flawlessly. And I just can't think of a thing wrong with this movie.
Yeah.
So do you want to give a little kind of synopsis of it? You don't have to go through the whole thing, but paint us a word picture, Josh.
So this is about a jazz drummer in New York City. He's a student and he's at this very prestigious conservatory school.
Schaefer.
Yes.
It's not Juilliard. Because Juilliard does not hire sociopaths, so it's definitely not Juilliard.
Yeah, but he's at this conservatory trying to make it into the core band there, which is like the highest level that he can get to. And his aspiration is to be like the greatest jazz drummer of all time. Basically, is what he wants to do, and he thinks this is the way to get there. And the core band leader is played by J.K. Simmons, and pretty much the whole movie is like, how much is this guy going to push him and push everybody? And is he pushing these people too much? Is he going overboard? It's kind of a big like moral question throughout the whole thing, I think. But yeah, I don't know what else to say without spoiling.
I think that's good. Let's talk about the opening. I love the opening. You hear the drums and it's a black screen. And then it cuts to a shot down the hallway of Andrew, played by Miles Teller, practicing. And then there's a slow dolly down the hallway. And then it doesn't cut until it gets right up to Miles and he starts talking. He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'll stop." And then it cuts to Fletcher, J.K. Simmons' character.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first time I actually saw that shot, this opening, and I was like, this is like Fletcher's point of view, I think. This idea that all we do is hear it, because he's looking for new members. So I was like, all we do is hear the drums. And I think when the shot comes in, that's like his interest is piqued. And we slowly see him move down the hallway. And even Miles basically directs the camera when he says like sorry or something. And then we cut to Fletcher and he's standing in the doorway, which is where the camera stops. So I thought that's kind of cool.
I think that's a good observation. Definitely his POV. And I think what I noticed this time is like, I feel like a lot of movies would start with establishing the setting with like a montage in New York City. Like, oh, we're at this music school. Well, maybe while you hear the drums and get into it. But this just gets right into the character and you can see him draw. And it starts with him practicing, like very focused and practicing. And I think it sets the character up so well. Like, oh, this guy is like, he's working hard at this. And it really sets up both of those characters so well and like kind of kicks off the dynamic. And it reminded me of kind of the opening of The Social Network in a way. But even though that's a much longer conversation and everything, but it's like almost like the inciting incident of the movie is happening like right at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get into the montage of where we are, where it's, they get into the New York City little montage to get us to the next scene, and Social Network has the Harvard montage. So it's like, I think it's a cool way to just jump you right into what's happening and like who these characters are.
Yeah. And you know what I like, it sets up, and something I almost didn't notice as much until this watch was, it does set up like both those characters well, especially Fletcher, and that he's very controlling. He's very particular. He's like, I'm looking for band members. Why'd you stop playing? So Miles starts playing again. He goes, "Did I tell you to start playing?" Like, this is a guy, right. You do everything on, if I can coin a phrase, you do everything on his tempo.
Yes.
But the thing I realized they set up, which does come up in the movie, he's got this dark sense of humor almost like, while Andrew's playing, you hear the door shut and he's gone. And then he comes back in and he just goes, "Oopsie, forgot my jacket." And he takes it and you're just like, and I know there's other parts that of course I can't think of right now, but maybe we'll come across them later. But yeah, there's a little bit of dark humor. Gosh, it's almost one of these things where you think the way he messes with these kids, does he just think it's kind of funny in some ways? Does he just think it's kind of funny? And then we move on to Andrew. He's at the movies. That's the next thing. He's at the movies and he's meeting his dad for his movies. And we also introduce Nicole, who he eventually starts dating in the movie, and his dad. And some of this stuff, I feel like I probably should have, since I have a background in movies and I've studied movies, and I like to be as pretentious as possible when it comes to movies. But Andrew's dad, who I don't know if we ever get a name for him, his character.
Yeah, I don't think so. Not that I know of.
But he's Andrew if Andrew gives up.
That's a good,
Because his dad was going to be a writer. But he's not. He teaches in high school. He becomes a teacher. But even because I specifically wrote this down because I didn't notice this before, but when they're sitting in the movie theater before the movie starts, some guy walks behind him, Andrew and his dad, and smacks him on the head. And his dad reflexively apologizes.
Yeah.
Two things. One, I think they're from the Midwest, because that's what we do.
That's very true.
You and I are both from Ohio, and that's what we would do. People run into us and we apologize. But two, this idea that I was like, he's a pushover,
Yeah. And you definitely see that later too, in a lot, like any scene that he's in, you see examples of this too.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, and there's even the scene later where he's having dinner with their like friends and stuff. And like, I think that scene literally opens with one of his friends telling him the dinner's crap, kind of as a joke, but his dad like laughs and goes, "It sure is." Yeah. So yeah, he's kind of, and then, Andrew ends up like putting them all in their place.
Yeah. Which is great.
But that was interesting. And you get the idea with Nicole.
I think this is where we start to notice that Andrew is like observing everything very well. There's a lot of moments where like you can see him just like looking and it'll show a detail. And it's like he's observing like how things could turn out or like what he should do to like get to these certain places. And I think it's like seeing his dad like in, in situations like that, because I think he even like stares at his dad for a second after he apologizes.
Oh yeah.
You can tell like what he's thinking, or that he's like taking that in as a detail.
Yeah, and actually, that's a great segue. I think and then the next scene is him at his. I don't know if they name it. It's basically his like regular band class,
the Nassau band, I think.
Yeah, and he's not lead drum, first chair.
Yeah.
I don't know band. I don't know band stuff.
Yeah.
But he's not. But I notice he's looking around, and there's cutaways to like, and the one I made note of was there's a couple kissing in the corner before class, and I don't know. I think Miles has this look on his face that to me, it's kind of this idea, since this movie is about, what do you want to be? What does it take to be the best? One of the greats, he says. But I think he looks at that couple thing, and I think there's a part of him that's like, well, is this something that I want? Because I think then, he's thinking about it. And so that may or may not give him kind of the motivation to go ask Nicole out later. So I thought that was good. I feel like he looks around. And actually, I love that you said observant, because this movie has so many interestingly placed, like very extreme close-up cutaways. It's often cut to music, but it's like the instruments and all this kind of stuff. And some of them, if you're not paying attention, you just miss them.
Yeah, totally. It's definitely like I had that cutaway like to that couple. It's like, just him like, is this what he wants? Is this gonna? And I think he smiles even when he looks like a little. You can see a little smile, like, oh, maybe this is something. Maybe I should like ask Nicole out. Yeah.
So Fletcher comes in, takes Andrew with him to join studio band. This actually, I think, is evidence that he just enjoys messing with people a little bit. Because he tells him to be there at 6 a.m. and don't be late. And so Andrew is about 10 minutes late. He wakes up, he's freaking out, he's running across town. And then he gets there, the room's locked, or there's just no one in there. His class starts at 9 a.m. So he's like asleep at the drum kit for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Before people start coming in. But again, he starts observing these guys, the veteran members come in and they start getting ready and all this stuff. And I think this is my favorite line in the movie, because someone shouts, "Milk the cunt."
Yeah. Right. When they're tuning or whatever.
Yeah.
Which I don't know what that means. Maybe it's their term to like, hey, let's all tune. Because I think at that point somebody plays a note and they're all tuning to something.
Yeah, I couldn't quite figure out what it is. I could have Googled it, but it feels like Googling "milk the cunt" is not something.
Maybe not.
It's going to take a lot of scrolling to get the result the answers I'm looking for.
Yeah. As soon as these people start walking in, you can tell like these are like, oh, these guys have been here. They know what they're doing. And it reminded me a lot of like when I like started college, like upperclassmen that I would see like just have a certain kind of confidence about them and just like, oh, we've been here before. We're doing this thing. That I kind of related to observing. But then that all changes very quickly as soon as Fletcher walks in, though.
That's a good point, because I had a similar experience. I think everyone has that experience in college. And it was interesting. I did watch some interview thing with Damien where he was talking about, he was trying to think of stories to tell. And he was like, well, I'm just going to draw on my own experience as a drummer. And he had a teacher who terrified him. And he thought, before he made this movie, he's like, well, even if nobody enjoys it, nobody relates to it, the presentation of this will be true. It will be exactly what it's like to be a drummer in a jazz band and all that kind of stuff. And so, but I think that's so specific, but like you said with that college example, it's a universal feeling, sort of this fish out of water thing. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I got that. And you know what's funny? I think there's almost a sense memory. Like you said, when those guys walk in and they're taller than him. I feel like, I know those guys are real musicians. I feel like it had to be deliberate to like, we're going to cast musicians that are like 2 feet taller than him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they got to routine and they're just trying to keep up. And then, enter Fletcher. I love his little outfit. Fletcher's little outfit.
It is nice. Yeah.
His black slacks pulled up to his nipples. But he comes in.
It's like they're all just sitting there, like nobody's even making eye contact with him. Which is really interesting. Like they're all just heads down waiting for him to speak or do something. And then his first thing he does is announces that Andrew's there. He calls him a squeaker, I think. And then I think they get into it at that point. And it's like it's the first time I think that Andrew's seen Fletcher like in this room with these people. And it's when one of the trombone players is out of tune, which is trying to decipher that. And it's this first time he sees like the real freak out of like the reputation of this guy that he's heard about.
Because like you said, he calls Andrew a squeaker. 19 years old, isn't he cute?
Yes. Yeah.
It's funny because he's starting almost this. It's like when he first starts this pattern of building Andrew up,
Mm-hmm.
and it's funny because I don't think does anyone react when he says that. Like he's almost trying to have this like this moment of levity with his band, like, hey, let's all share a laugh. We got this new guy with us, but I don't think anyone reacts.
I don't think so.
And like you said, he comes in. Yeah, they look down. It's very militaristic. Things are done a certain way. Did you watch the short film?
I did, yeah.
Okay. So the short film, Damien was trying to, what I read said that he was trying to get funding. He couldn't get funding for this movie. So he made the short. He's like, well, I'll just make a short from the script, the feature, and I'll show it at festivals and hopefully get funding that way. And it worked.
Yeah.
And one thing, and there aren't a lot, but one thing I thought was interesting that I liked in the short film that they didn't put in the, at least I don't think they put it in the feature, was Andrew looks up right before Fletcher comes in and you see the clock count down. And as soon as it hits 9 o'clock, he walks in the door.
Yeah, that was actually, it does happen. I don't know if Andrew knew it, but it does have the second hand. It hits 9 and the door opens.
And everything snaps to attention. Okay. I couldn't remember that because I like that moment. I do think as long as we're comparing the short film, the scene with that part in that scene where he says someone's out of tune, he ends up screaming at the guy and kicks him out. It's better in the feature. I don't know if it's just a little tighter and lines are a little different and all that. So, so they take a break. Actually, what's funny is they're taking a break. He's like, we're going to take a break. Yeah. The speaker's on next. They've played like 3 lines of music and they're taking a break. Like,
and I'm wondering if he wants to take a break just because of what he's about to do then.
He knows he wants to go. That's a good point. Because other than that, it's like, you guys have been practicing for all of 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That's true. He might be like, I gotta mess with this guy before he starts playing. Right. Because they're out in the hallway while they're taking a break, and Fletcher kind of talks him up, and you're meant to be here, and do you have any musicians in the family, and what do your parents do? And he learns that Andrew says his mom left when he was a kid, and his dad is a failed writer.
Yeah,
really taking an interest in young Andrew and his life and what got him there. As we come to see, this is like his sociopathic behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, a big part of this movie is, does he push people too hard? But there's definitely something wrong with this guy.
There's something wrong with this guy. Yeah, for sure. And you see like the cycles of this, like throughout of like, he's nice, but is he genuinely nice? Probably not. He's going to use this information that he's getting out of you for something like to his advantage. He's, I guess you could say he's as observant as Andrew and that he's taking this stuff in and like, he's like, oh, maybe I can use that. Like as an insult against you to push you.
So we move forward into the scene, and this is a famous scene. The most famous scene in the movie is the not quite my tempo. Are you rushing? Are you dragging? And then he actually throws a chair at Andrew because Andrew's not getting the tempo, and he slaps him and all that stuff.
Yeah, there's one detail like when he throws the chair at him that I really love for some reason, and it's like it can't be like a mistake. Like they had to have noticed it. It's like when he throws the chair, it's everything. There hasn't really been a lot of like shaky camera things or anything happening, but like he throws the chair. As soon as that chair hits the wall, you can see the camera shake like just a little bit. And then it's like that moment that it triggers like these more like intense close-ups that have a little more handheld look to them. Cause that's like really the moment that the intensity is like gets crazy.
And I think that's a good use of handheld. I hate, and I feel like this has kind of died down, and I'm trying to think what movie sort of popularizes the idea of handheld camera to make you feel like you're there, which I hate. It's just, I hate it because it's overused.
Yeah.
But I think that serves a purpose. It adds the intensity. I would almost argue, is that shaky cam in that moment? I mean, Andrew's shaking a little. Maybe we're all shaking a little. So is that it?
Yeah.
Actually, I saw the while he's screaming at him, and he says, "I'll." The line in the movie is, "I will fuck you like a pig."
Yeah.
Which, do you know the story behind that line? Why that's in
I
the
don't.
movie? So
No.
I guess in the short, and I don't know if it's actually in the short or just an outtake from the short, when he says that line, it cuts away from him, from JK, because apparently that was he said I think the actual line is something like, I will fuck you up like a fat pig, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I guess JK misspoke the line, just said, I will fuck you like a pig. And Damien, I guess, according to the source I read, whatever it was, probably IMDb, but according to this source, that Damien loved that. He just thought it was great. And JK was like, that's ridiculous. I'm not saying it. So Damien took that outtake from the short and put it in the movie. That's why JK's face isn't on there. Because he wanted the line, I will fuck you like a pig.
It's effective.
I like it. Actually, the only argument I would give against putting that in there, and this is nitpicking, but is the idea that as much as he screams and throws things and just shouts the worst things, he's kind of always in control. It's always very calculated. And I will fuck you like a pig is nonsense. Like, that doesn't mean, like, what in this context, even in the most graphic context of this studio band, why would you fuck him like a pig?
Right.
And like we said, he uses the line, among his many insults, he talks about his mom and how his mom left him, and his dad's a failed writer, and how you're a loser, and all this stuff. Let me ask you something, because I thought of this when I was on there, because he keeps doing the rushing or dragging. I'm not a musician. I haven't taken piano lessons since I was like 12. Was Andrew actually rushing or dragging? Or do you think he was just trying to break him?
So I think it's hard to say. Like, there are definitely some, I think he was rushing a little bit, but then I think he does correct himself at some point, and then I think he just starts to do it just to mess with him.
So I wondered if it was initially, he was like, I'm going to test him, kind of like the out of tune thing. You didn't know the difference, so I'm going to call you out on your tempo. But like you said, I think he started overcorrecting then. Yeah, because then he does start messing up. But that idea that he was probably fine, but he's like, I'm going to see if you know the difference, because that's worse, not knowing. Actually, another comparison, maybe we'll just sprinkle the short film in throughout this. Actually, the short film is this scene.
It's this scene,
If no one's watched it, I'm sure it's on YouTube. You can probably watch it for free. It's worth a watch. It's fun to notice little changes, things they didn't change at all. Shot for shot, cut for cut. There are parts of it that are a 1-to-1 from the short to the feature. One thing I liked, I forget the actor's name who played, because Miles Teller's not in the short, but J.K. Simmons is. The actor who plays Andrew in the short, his last name is Simmons. No relation.
I think it's the guy who was in Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
He's been in some other stuff.
He's been in some things,
I thought that actor played Andrew a little more timid, a little more meek. Like, we kind of talk about this fish out of water thing, and I like the way Miles plays, certainly at the beginning of the movie, and this is what gets rocked, is he plays Andrew from a little more of a sense of confidence. I don't know if you experienced this. I was like the creative kid in school. And where I went to, like in high school, in grade school, and high school. And so I was like the creative kid. I was the best artist in the class and all that kind of stuff. Which is why I'm so rich now. And, but there was always this idea that, well, when you get to college, and I was told this and I believed it, like, when you get to college, there will be people better than you. So I think Andrew was probably the best musician in his town. Actually, I get the sense he probably lives somewhere in New England. We never really told, because he goes to his
I'm not
dad's
sure.
house.
I don't know if it was like upstate or if it was just.
But yeah, he was probably the best musician in the city, the county, maybe the state kind of thing. And so I like Miles plays this character with a little bit of confidence, teetering on arrogance, but I like that. But I like it, and especially when he starts playing with the studio band for that first lesson, and Fletcher says, "We got Buddy Rich here," and like he has this smirk on his face, like, "Yeah, he's validating himself." He's like, "Yeah, I am as good as I think, maybe." And so I think it's a bigger fall because he's probably had a lot of natural talent as well as working hard, and so to have someone sit there and just belittle him in front of a group of people, it's a bigger fall. Whereas in the short, the Andrew character he's a little meek and timid, and and so when he has this fall at the beginning, it's just not as big a one. So I like the way Miles plays that.
I think it's like, and this movie, like anytime anybody talks about it, and definitely the buzz around it when it came out is like how amazing J.K. Simmons is in this movie, which he's incredible. But I feel like there was barely any talk about Miles Teller, like in his performance, because if his performance doesn't work, then this movie doesn't work, because he's literally in every single scene in this movie. I think there's not a single scene that he's not in. So he's in every scene. Yeah. If his performance doesn't work in this thing, then it all kind of falls apart. And I think there's one deleted scene where it's like Fletcher at home. We don't need to see that. It's not his story. This is Andrew's story, and Fletcher is a big part of it.
Well, and I think it's to your point that the Andrew character, it has to be a more subtle performance, and it has to be much more gradual. When everyone thinks about the performances in this movie, they talk about J.K. Simmons. J.K.'s fantastic in this, obviously. Miles has to do a much more subtle, and because it's a very slow breakdown. And actually the thing I like I said, he's kind of like been knocked off his pedestal for the first time at the end of this first lesson. But then he decides to, instead of sulk about it, because he wants to be one of the greats. He starts working at it. He starts bleeding. I think is that the scene? He's like bandaging him up, right? He's hands up because he's working on the
double time swing.
Yeah. The shot of, I love the shot where he's sticking his bloody hand in the pitcher of ice water. This is that scene, right? And he's like, Damien turns the camera like sideways, and like gorgeous shot. But this is also a great reinforcement of Andrew. Andrew wants to be one of the greats, and in his mind, he's willing to do what it takes to be one of the greats. And so it's worth it for him to practice till he bleeds. Actually, one of the pieces of trivia I looked up that said that some of that blood is real.
Oh, wow.
It's Miles Teller's blood. I don't know. It's not like someone else's.
Somebody else was bleeding too.
It's a PA's. Like, I feel like we might as well say this at one point. And I did watch, and I couldn't find it. Otherwise, I'd credit whoever made it, because it was great. But there is a really good video essay about this movie somewhere on YouTube that this is a sports movie. This is every sports movie you've ever seen, right? Just with music.
That's very true. I saw a negative review that one of their lines was like, "This is just a sports movie with a brass section." I'm like, that's accurate, but like,
how is that a criticism anyway? This is a sports movie with a brass. Okay, like,
right.
Actually, you know what? That's probably the same guy that wrote a negative review for that Ghostbusters in like 2016. This is like Ghostbusters, but with girls. Yes, it is.
Really creative it is. Observation.
So anyway, Andrew's practicing till his hands bleed, and then he's on a date. I think we skipped the part at some point in there. He asked Nicole out on a date. Actually, just to go back to the scene where he asks her out, she is, I think, in a lot of posters and stuff, she's like third. Wow. She's got third billing on this, and I think I read she's got like 12 minutes of screen time.
That sounds about right. She's got only a few scenes, really. Yeah,
she's fantastic, and actually, those two, their chemistry is fantastic. I love the scene where he asks her out. Definitely one of those scenes you either give a lot of credit to the writer, or you give a lot of credit to those two actors for maybe improvising a lot of that. But it's great and awkward. Actually, it's not super realistic, because every time I try to do like be funny and awkward with a girl, I get shot down. So 0 out of 10
You
for Whiplash. But anyway, they're at the pizza thing. And I think the scene is so, it's very efficient in its storytelling.
Yeah.
Because it establishes two things very well. They do have chemistry and they are attracted to each other. But also, I love that she talks about whatever school she's going to. She doesn't have a major.
Yeah.
Fordham. And she doesn't have a major. He's like, why did you want to go to Fordham? And she goes, I don't know. I applied to places and this one accepted me.
Yeah.
Whereas Andrew is like, I wanted to go to the best school in the country and I want to be one of the best.
Yeah.
I like this idea of him. Andrew cannot possibly register the idea of someone with no drive.
Yeah.
Or rather is driven in different ways. They're ambitious in different ways, but to him, it's about being the absolute best or not trying at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so things go well for them. And I don't know, you got anything else about that scene?
No, I think it's just nice to have like those scenes feel like a little bit of a breather in the chaos of everything.
If I remember right, and if we were professional, we would have wrote this down, but I think it's a thing where we're introduced to her after the first scene. So we've met Fletcher and stuff.
Yeah.
I think after Fletcher tells him to come to studio band, that's then Andrew's feeling very confident.
Yes. Then he asks her out.
Got a big brass section between his legs. Yeah. So he's like, I'm going to go ask this girl out. And then he asks her out. And then they go on their date after, I think it's just after that, he goes to his first practice.
Yeah. And then I think it's like he gets deflated. Yeah. From that.
But then he goes and practices and he goes on the date with her. And
yeah, I think after this is we get the first like look at the band actually performing in like outside of the classroom. It's whatever circuit they're doing of like performances.
I feel like as I'm watching this, because I've never watched a movie in this capacity where I'm taking notes, I might be overthinking everything. But I thought it was interesting that Andrew kind of looks out and Fletcher is obviously talking to like a friend of his, someone he knows, and he's got this young daughter. And so it's like that. And that's why, like you said, there's that Fletcher at home thing, which we don't need. I think Damien was very smart in how much of Fletcher outside of the band do we show. Yeah. But it is that idea that, he's friendly with his friend. They're very nice to each other. They hug each other. He's very nice to his daughter. He says, will you come play for me someday? And I guess my question is, why is that in there? Why does Damien leave that in there?
That's a good question. I think it definitely, to your point, can replace the idea of like Fletcher at home, where it's like we see him, maybe he's not aware he's being observed by anybody in the band, and we can but Andrew is observing it. If it's another example of Andrew being observant to something,
I almost wonder, to me, if is it supposed to illustrate this idea? Because I think a lot of people have a like a personal persona and a work persona. I had a boss once that scared the hell out of me on a job. This was a job on a movie, and this person was so scary. And the interesting thing was, towards the end of the shoot, everything's in motion, everything's been set up. Like, we just ride out the shoot at this point.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, this person just became super friendly with us, but very particular. A lot of screaming, scared us all to death. But and I will credit this person. I'm not going to name him, obviously, or what the job was, but I will credit this person because they did show me a level of work ethic I'd never seen before. And so I credit this person and one other boss I had in New York with for informing a lot of my professional how I work professionally. It is this kind of idea that you almost put on this mask when you go to work. And certainly something that comes up towards the end of the movie is Fletcher talks about how he just wants, like, it is about getting the best out of your musicians, in this case specifically musicians, but getting the best out of them at any cost.
Yeah. Which
begs the question, who's the real Fletcher?
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. So fast forwarding to the folder, you kind of gave what's like a synopsis. Where do we end up? Where are we to the point that we lose the folder?
It's where, because and it's set up so well, because he's like, they come in and Fletcher finds some of these folders. He's like, if I see another one of these laying around, I swear I won't be so nice next time, or something like that.
He'll fuck you like a pig.
Yeah. Which is like great setup. Like, okay, well now we know he's upset that these people are losing their folders. At which point the first chair drummer tells Andrew, "Here, hold my folder until the next set." Andrew goes out to get a drink from the vending machine, and you see him toss it onto a chair. At which point you're like, okay, something's going to happen with this folder. The drummer comes out and is like, "Hey, where's the folder?" He's like, "Oh, it's right here," and it's not there.
I watched this so closely because I was like, "There's got to be." It's very fast.
Yeah,
I think from the time he tosses it on the chair, because he does that, he puts his coins in a vending machine. He grabs his drink, and he's taking a sip of it, kind of looking out, I think, towards the stage. And they just finished like their first set, and I guess they're supposed to do another one. I don't know what it's less than 20 seconds. It's so fast. And we see the hallway. It's empty.
Yeah.
So who stole the folder, Josh?
For some reason, my thought when I was like watching it is like, I feel like I remembered like Fletcher admitting that he stole the folder, but that doesn't happen. Like, it seems like based on the things Fletcher's been doing, it seems like he would be the one to do it, but it's never confirmed.
And that's it. And it's interesting because something we'll get to later is I thought I was super clever at a scene a little later where I had this insight. I'm like, oh, I bet this is what Fletcher was thinking. Then he literally admits it later. So, Fletcher's way ahead of me. But yeah, you're right. It's interesting that there was a choice to not say whoever stole the folder, what happened to the folder. I think the knee-jerk reaction is two guys who watch a lot of movies was, well, Andrew stole it or like disposed of it. So he had this opportunity, but there was no chance for him to do that.
Because it creates the perfect opportunity for him to be able to step in and be like, I know these things. I'll take over. I'll do it. Where this guy, this other drummer needs his charts.
And that's it. It looks very opportunistic for Andrew and because they get back there and Fletcher screams at Tanner, tells him, the folder's your responsibility. Andrew has the charts memorized and Tanner doesn't. So Andrew gets a chance to play in the band in this competition. And they win, right? They win.
I think they do. And then I think it goes, at that point, is it at that point where they go they're into the practice room again. Andrew's sitting in the second chair and Fletcher walks in and says, "Hey, Tanner, I got no time for alternates today." Yeah. And we're like, oh, Andrew's now the core drummer, which I think elevates his confidence to then act the way he does going forward, where he's kind of taking on Fletcher's like insulting remarks where he's testing out like, oh, I can say these things too. And maybe like before he was just kind of like observing and kind of quiet.
Yeah. And like you said, he's Andrew's getting a little cocky, and there's a good up and down with his ego throughout this whole movie. And I actually wondered, I was just thinking with the folder, if we're making the assumption that Fletcher did something with it, did he see greatness in Andrew? So he wanted to give him that opportunity, kind of this a sink or swim opportunity. Yeah. Did he steal it because he's like, I need this kid I want to see if he's memorized it, and I want to see if he can step up when he needs to.
Because then it's like, does he jeopardize like the performance of his band on this kid hopefully having memorized the things, or would he, if Andrew wouldn't have stepped up, would he have like somehow made the folder found so that Tanner could jump back in?
Yeah, and that's it. That's such a good balance throughout this movie is how much of this from Fletcher is deliberate and deliberately trying to bring the best out of Andrew. How much of it is him just being a sociopath?
Yeah. Even later, he says he's having the conversation with Andrew much later in the movie, and he's like, what if what you're doing like discourages somebody from even going? He's like, well, the right person wouldn't be discouraged.
The next Charlie Parker wouldn't get discouraged.
Yeah.
And speaking of discouraging, I don't know the exact order of things. We said he goes through the or is it okay? So he moves Tanner out of first chair.
Yeah.
And Andrew gets moved up. I think it's the end of that practice where he's like, you guys have new charts.
Yeah.
We'll use them tonight. Be ready to play them tonight. And that's when he brings in Connolly, Ryan Connolly. And this was, I don't think we mentioned, Connolly was first chair in the band class that Andrew was originally in. Andrew beat out Connolly for this spot in studio band. So he brings in Connolly. And this was this moment when he brought Connolly in. I was like, he's bringing Connolly in, not for Connolly, but for Andrew to test him. Yeah,
absolutely.
He literally, he admits to that later.
Yeah, he does.
So that was it. My one gripping insight on this movie. But yeah, just push it. And again, I think that whole sequence, because that moves into this idea, because they fast forward to, first of all, I think it's funny that they have that practice that evening and they have to have those charts.
Yeah.
And Andrew practices all afternoon, obviously, on trying to get faster. Now, I don't know nothing about drumming.
Yeah.
But I assume there's, to be able to play faster and faster and faster, there takes some physical prowess, some conditioning, strength conditioning, cardio, whatever. I don't know anything about drumming, but I think practicing all afternoon and then trying to practice and then play it right that night, you're setting yourself up to fail, Andrew.
That's true.
You need 48 hours and like a protein shake, and those muscles will recover, and that would be better. But
very true.
Actually, so they fast forward to the evening, and he's trying to get between Connolly, between Andrew, between Tanner, between all these guys. He's trying to get one of them to be able to play this tempo correctly.
Yeah.
Which my first thought was, my God, he's hard on these drummers. He doesn't do this to anyone else. He's yelled at one trumpet player.
And he's giving everybody a break. I mean, to be fair, it's like the drumming is Fletcher's running like the time that they need to be playing. And like the drummer has to keep that tempo for everybody, because everybody's kind of has to be on time with the drummer no matter what. The most important thing to keep the time of everybody is the drummer. So I understand that, but he is absolutely going crazy on these drummers, and everybody else is just on a break. Not that they're not going to have to work a lot later, though, because he's kind of screwing them over.
It's funny because he only lets them all attempt it for maybe 5 seconds, and then he switches to the next one. But it is at the end when he finally lets him go. It's Andrew, because he wants him to earn the part, and but he gives Andrew the longest time to try it, to like work up to and get better, which I think just kind of adds to this notion that everything Fletcher's doing as far as these drums go is for Andrew. He's trying to do everything he can to push Andrew. At some point, he decided Tanner wasn't cutting it, so he didn't want Tanner. Like, he wants Andrew. That's who he wants to push. And then it's like 2 a.m. and they have to start practice. Is it after that when he breaks up with Nicole? Yeah. Yeah. He breaks up with Nicole. And I think this is Andrew realizing if he wants to be one of the greats, he can't have any other distractions.
No distractions, yeah. I think the camera really stays on her a lot, like when she's taking all this in, and he's just kind of laying it out there.
And I do think she has this kind of slow, like, it's not just breaking her heart because she likes this guy. I think it's just she's personally being attacked.
It's taking like, it's attacking her, like oh, so I don't have any drive. I'm not doing anything worthwhile.
Yeah, and he gives this entire rundown of what their relationship will be, and basically what it amounts to is that she'll resent him for wanting to be great, and she'll hold him back, and she'll try to get him to stop, and he'll resent her for her trying to do it. Yeah, and she's just like, and you think I'm going to do all that? Like, you assume I'm going to do all that? And that goes back to one of those early scenes where he sees that couple kissing, and I think he wonders if that's something he wants to. Let me ask you this about this: when he breaks up with her. Do you think it would have been more impactful, like if it would have made his drive seem kind of intense, if this was more of a long-term relationship? What if they were like engaged and he's like, I've got to end this because I want to be one of the greats and I don't have time for whatever, a relationship, marriage, a family?
That's interesting. I think it definitely would have been more impactful, but then I'm also thinking, like, would he have even will he ever allow himself to get to that point? And or is he just destined to be not with anybody? Because I think it's like him trying out a relationship and then quickly realizing, oh no, this is not. So I don't even know if he would get to that point.
I think you're right that he wanted to try a relationship, kind of his because he says in a scene where he's at his dad's house and there's like a dinner with a bunch of family members, but they point out he has no friends, and he says, I've never seen the need. So I think, you're right. He kind of found himself liking this girl, and he wanted to try it out, but it didn't fit in with his goals and drive. And then I wrote down, Andrew starts abusing himself. I know I meant that as it pertains to practicing music. This is how he deals with a breakup, not me. So I know I wrote that down for a specific scene, and now I can't remember. Oh, I think it's the scene where he's trying to He is practicing and he's trying to get that tempo down, and he like he gets frustrated. He starts punching
when he punches through the drum.
He punches through
Is
the
that
drum.
Right? Yeah.
Yes. Boy, I'm glad we cleared that up. All right, moving right along. So Andrew breaks up with Nicole. We move into a scene. I think this is the evening scene. This might be before the part where he like pits all three drummers against each other. Fletcher announces that a former student of his died in a car accident, and he plays music, and he talks about the Sean Casey is this person's name, and that this person was kind of barely made it into studio band, and then was like eventually made to first chair at Lincoln Center Band. I think he says very successful. And as he's talking about this character, we see him crying. Fletcher crying.
This is the lowest state we've ever seen him in, and like obviously we've never seen him crying and being emotional like that. So it's like, and we kind of get I think we get a little foreshadowing of this in the scene where when Connolly gets the part, and then Andrew kind of rushes into Fletcher's office as he's on the phone and is just like he's like, Andrew becomes like the most like confident like asshole member of the band, where he's like able to like confront Fletcher about like are you kidding me with that shit? That's like, then he gets the part and all this, and he's like really talking back to him, and Fletcher, you can tell, is just like something's changed in him from what he's heard on the phone.
Yeah. Andrew's ego's kind of growing again. And yeah, it's kind of this interesting thing. Like we said, like I've said before, with Andrew does what he wants to do, or is willing to do what he believes is whatever it takes. And so he's kind of like, Fletcher sets the bar a little higher and Andrew kind of raises up, and then he gets a little confident and Fletcher keeps raising the bar, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's practicing harder. Sometimes it's some verbal abuse, but Andrew's kind of like trying to clear all these hurdles. So yeah. And it's interesting. I thought this scene, and as we talk about this, I feel like it's hard to 100% be certain of Fletcher's intentions, because I believe he's crying because he's talking about the success this person had because they worked hard. And so you see that Fletcher respects that kind of success. I think this shines a light on certainly the conversation him and Andrew have later, this conversation about just pushing people beyond what is expected of them. Yeah. And so if you do, and like you said, he says that the next Charlie Parker wouldn't get discouraged. So he had someone who didn't get discouraged, and but all that being said, could be nonsense. I don't know. Right. Maybe he don't know.
And we do find out later, though, that it wasn't actually a car accident, and that this person actually hung themselves,
committed suicide.
Yeah. Is it? I don't feel like it's him feeling any remorse for that, but could it be? I don't know.
Exactly. And I saw something that said originally this was kind of written as more of as a thriller. I think you could still argue it kind of is, but it was written as more of a thriller, and I certainly think that was probably played a big part into it. Yeah, he lied about it. What's interesting is him lying about it, about what killed Sean Casey. Him lying about it is it him not being willing to take responsibility for what he's doing? Is he crying? Are those tears real? Is he crying over the death of a person or just a musician? Because he doesn't change. In any other movie, he would have seen the error of his ways, and learned to motivate through positive reinforcement and chocolates.
Exactly.
But he didn't. So
but it's when he, after this, that he really doubles down. Like you think maybe he's going to change from this, but then this is the moment where he's really trying out all those drummers, and he's really just doubling down on his intensity and manipulation and like verbal abuse, which could be like just lashing out from not knowing how to react from that. Or maybe he sees Sean Casey as finally being discouraged. So maybe he wasn't the person that he thought he was going to be. Who knows if he's that dark in the mind about it.
Well, Fletcher says towards the end, because he says he always wanted the next like Charlie Parker. He goes, I never got one. And I wonder if he thought that's who Sean Casey was. And like you said, Sean Casey gave up, got discouraged and gave up. Yeah. So is that what he's crying over?
Right. Yeah. So maybe he thought he got one, but then like, oh, maybe I didn't which is kind of a dark way to take that, of like him being upset that like, oh, I guess he's not the one. I guess I got to keep looking.
He's a sociopath. Like he definitely he would find a way to make someone else a suicide about him.
Yeah.
So after Andrew earns the part, they're at that another competition. And Andrew keeps getting, at this point, Andrew's being pushed harder and harder and harder. He's pushing himself harder, and he's pushing Fletcher's pushing him harder. And we don't need to recount the whole scene, but to the whole sequence. But they're at a competition, and he ends up showing up late because of his bus broke down. And then
I had one thought here: do none of these people travel together or travel in the same way?
I wondered that too. He tells everyone he's like, give yourself 2 hours to get there.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't know how things work in New York, but like colleges, you'd have a team bus, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I feel like typically, and if you didn't, then I feel like people would be like, hey, let's figure out how to get there together.
Yeah, and it is a little weird. No one else from the band is on that same bus as him. Why would they not be on the same bus?
I know. Yeah.
Actually, what was also baffling to me was this kid in college, who's poor in college, had no problems like renting a car. That wouldn't have been an option for me. I would have barely had the money to get the bus, but in a pinch, do you have money to rent a car? I don't even have money to rent a car that much now. So, but yeah, as he rents the car, he leaves his sticks at the rental place, gets to the competition. He realizes he doesn't have them, but he's telling, and I like this scene, like his ego.
Oh,
Several things kind of hit a boiling point in this whole sequence. His ego, and we haven't seen anyone else do it. Stand up to Fletcher like that.
Oh yeah.
And I think Fletcher's a little taken back by it, but he does that. But he tells him like, what is he? He's got like 10 minutes to get back to the car place.
This is when like Andrew's really starting to like find his like Fletcher insults too. When he says to Connolly, when he says to him,
you said O'Connolly. You said O'Connolly because he's got red hair. That's why he must be Irish.
He's like, basically, they're arguing back and forth, and he's like, "Fuck off, Johnny Utah, turn my pages, bitch," which is totally a Fletcher insult would come up with. And actually, I looked. This is a little random thing. I saw like this script was like so well written that I think J.K. Simmons said the only line that he like really improvised was when he called Andrew a self-righteous little prick. Yeah. Aside from that, it's pretty much was all on the page, which is, it feels like something that his character could have been improvising things, a lot of different things. But that just goes to show like how well written that character was.
And I wonder if he threw that in there, he was like resetting as he's flying through these insults. He needed a quick reset. So he just threw something out there until he got a hold of himself and then like kept on going. Andrew's ego boils over. And actually one thing I wanted to mention, it's the scene before, because they're practicing. He's got the drummers fighting for this part. They don't start actual practice until 2 a.m. And then who knows when they got out, presumably at about 4. And I love this shot. It's Andrew breaking down. I love that he comes out. There's like this cyan light in the shot, and he's walking, and he looks so broken. That you see he's starting to come apart at the seams. And so then you fast forward to this sequence. He's got 10 minutes. He's got to go back to the rental place, get his sticks. He is driving like a psycho, and he gets hit by a truck. It's not the first time someone's done it, but it looks great. They leave the camera in the car. Again, kind of going back to this film's original like thriller roots, is that you've got this shot of him on the phone in the car, and he's driving, and it's the camera's pointing out the driver's side window, and then you just see a truck appear and flip the car, and it's effective here because it's not the kind of movie you expect that in. No. But he crawls back, and he runs back, and he's bloody and limping, and
it's funny they show the clock too, because it's like we're on stage at 5:30, whatever, and even the clock is like 5:32, and you're like, oh come on, man, you're not like just chill. But he's like, I got to get there.
And interestingly, they haven't started when he shows up like 5 minutes late.
Yeah, right.
So,
Which is another thing. Maybe that's another Fletcher, like, hey, you got 10 minutes, and it's like, that could be another 6 a.m. thing. Or maybe
I don't know.
he's like,
Those kind of things probably never run on time.
yeah.
So it's the only thing in music competitions that doesn't run on time. Am I right?
Woo!
That's a clever thing I'll say today. Finally, someone heard it. So, but he sits down and they start playing, and he's so wounded that he can't hold the sticks. He's falling apart. Everyone's noticing it.
Yeah.
And the thing I like is he's frustrated. He's angry that his body is giving out because he can't perform. And eventually he stops, right? Like he kind of, there's a great edit where he looks up and Fletcher's just standing there and he goes, it's over, man.
Yeah.
And I would say this is this isn't the climax of the movie, but just this is Andrew's breaking point because he starts to walk off stage in shame, and then he tackles Fletcher and attacks him. And but I think for Andrew's character, it's this breaking point. Actually, I was reading something about the scene later where Andrew sees Fletcher at the jazz club and they're having a conversation that said something about this said something about Fletcher is talking to Andrew like he's a recovering addict.
That's interesting.
And I liked that. I thought that was interesting that Andrew is an addict. And so this is his rock bottom when he finally boils over. He tackles a staff member of his school and gets kicked out, and he's hit rock bottom. So, and then actually one thing I wondered, and maybe this is just the way they cut it to build some dramatic tension. Andrew's already, and it's a little hard to tell because we have him cleaning out his room. Like he's got his letter of dismissal and he's cleaning out his room. We've also got him, his dad, and somebody with the school. I don't know. Questioning him about, the abuse he took from Fletcher. And I guess to me, it feels like Andrew he's kicked out of school already. He's reluctant to, why is he reluctant to condemn Fletcher? Why would he be reluctant to do that at this point?
I'm wondering if it's like him still feeling like it was all warranted because of how much he was improving and seeing maybe like, oh, this the way that this guy's doing it is working, even though in those moments where he like lashed out and tackled him and was beating the shit out of him, was it that he's like understood what he was doing in a way where it's like, I was improving, and these are sometimes that's the cost of what you have to do to get better. And then I don't know if it's like he doesn't feel like he needs to put the blame on Fletcher for it, because his dad is obviously very like clearly like, obviously he's like, this guy manipulated you, he's pushed you too hard, and then this happened. But his dad doesn't have the same drive that he does. It might be some denial of like actually being done, and also understanding that what Fletcher was doing was making him a better drummer, and he doesn't want to give that up just yet.
Yeah. So he wants to, but he does decide, tells him to tell him what to say. And this is also the scene where we find out that Sean Casey committed suicide, not that.
Yes, that's right.
He did not die in a car accident. So then we have a nice kind of a montage. He's God, I feel bad for the kid, for Andrew.
I know.
His only prospects is working at a sandwich shop, but he ends up. This might be one of, if not my favorite scene in the movie, is he sees that Fletcher's playing at a jazz club, and they ended up having a conversation after Fletcher's done playing, and this is the scene with the line that everyone quotes. Everyone quotes thinking that this is like the theme of the movie, and that taken at face value that Fletcher says that there are no two words more dangerous in the English language than good job. And a lot of people take that as like, oh, that's absolutely true. And he makes some good points. I think this is such a great example of a villain that speaks some sense. He says, I push people beyond what is expected of them. And Fletcher believes he's kind of part of a dying breed of people who are willing to push people to be the best they can possibly be. Like you said earlier, Andrew says, well, what if you're discouraging the next Charlie Parker? And he says the next Charlie Parker wouldn't get discouraged. What do you think about all that kind of mentality?
I mean,
All
I can
negative reinforcement.
all negative. I can see how it can be effective in some ways, but it's like, is all the chaos that you bring on other people's lives that you're trying to push that far, is that all worth getting one person who maybe does break through?
Yeah,
I
because
don't know.
he's literally leaving bodies in his wake, like
Yeah.
as he's trying to find the next great jazz musician.
Yeah.
Is it worth it? And I can see for him from his point of view, and possibly Andrew's, that it doesn't matter. Like literally, it's okay if people die.
Yeah.
Trying to find the world deserves the next Charlie Parker.
Right.
I think all his everything he says up to that point, that the next Charlie Parker wouldn't get discouraged. Everything he says up to that point, I'm like, I agree with you, but I can see why that would backfire. But then he says the next one wouldn't get discouraged, and you're like, yeah, maybe that's true. You know, maybe anything I've given up on in my life, if I hadn't got discouraged, you know, it's on me. You know, and
Right.
because I don't think Damien's intention with this movie is to say success no matter what. I mean, he said what inspired him was a music teacher he had growing up that scared the hell out of him. And I even just watched something that he said that he's like, about once a month I have a nightmare about this guy.
Oh, wow.
I mean, don't tell me that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's interesting I don't think that's Damien's intention.
No.
Even though that's a lot of what people took from it.
Also, like, talking about Damien Chazelle, I feel like this is the best. I mean, this is my favorite movie that he's ever made. I think it's like the most precise, the best thing he's done. Everything after this, like, I love La La Land. I think First Man is kind of forgettable, and then Babylon is just. I love parts of Babylon, but it's just like an overblown craziness. It's interesting that this is the movie that's like so tight and precise and so well made, and then everything after it is kind of has some fluff to it and things that don't feel as perfect. Although maybe this is just the movie that should feel that way.
It's an interesting thing. One thing I love about movies is some of the most iconic stuff, some of the most, whether it's moments or entire films, come from this idea that the maximum creativity comes out of the fewest amount of resources. You know, I mean, when I worked on the biggest movie I worked on when I was in New York was The Dark Knight Rises. And that was a $250 million budget. Nothing else I worked on ever came close to having that kind of budget. And it was a movie that, and we're not debating because of that, we're not debating the quality of the movie or not. But it's this idea that it was a movie that you could throw problems at. But there is an idea, I think, when you get, there is a director on a movie. Actually, I'll say his name because he learned a lesson from it. It was Drake Doremus. He was directing a movie I worked on called Equals, but he got his, he got noticed in Sundance for a movie called Like Crazy. And that movie was famous because it was a big deal because it's a love story, but it's basically the whole movie. There's like a treatment, but there was never a script, and they just kind of improvised the whole thing. So anyway, they won the grand jury prize at Sundance, but it was interesting because, and I believe him and I had a conversation. He was not happy with his second movie, his next feature after that. Because he did say it was this idea that, you know, we made this little tiny movie and it was a big hit. Suddenly people were throwing money at us. And not only but we had to get something off the ground right away. And he goes, we just kind of rushed the idea and we didn't develop the idea. And it's funny because I think of that when I think of Damien and not to pick on Damien, but I'm kind of with you on that. I have not seen Babylon. I've read reviews, but and La La Land's a very well-crafted movie. I don't know why I didn't love it. It didn't register with me like it did a lot of people. But I agree with you. First Man, and actually, the interesting thing about First Man is Whiplash was something so well executed, and La La Land was something so well executed. And I guess First Man just feels kind of run-of-the-mill, which I wouldn't have expected from him.
I think and then with Babylon, I know you haven't seen it, but it's like, it almost feels like an overcorrection of that. And I think I've heard somebody say this, that it felt like he was like, well, I might never make another movie again, so I might as well throw all of my ideas into this one. And it totally felt like that. And there are moments of it that I think are really great, but as a whole, it's just so bloated and in a weird way, and just definitely could have used some cutting down.
We've gotten off topic, haven't we?
We have a little bit.
So anyway, Fletcher and Andrew have that scene, and at the end of the scene in the bar, in the club, Fletcher invites Andrew to play with him at a jazz festival that's coming up. He says he needs a good drummer. Fletcher also told him that he wasn't working at Schaefer anymore because he thinks the family of Sean Casey said some things that got Fletcher fired.
Yeah.
And then he invites Andrew to be his drummer. I wondered, before we get to the finale, Andrew, he like picks up his sticks again. He starts playing. Presumably he hasn't played in a while. He calls Nicole. Why do we think he calls Nicole? Because the interesting thing is he calls to invite her to the to JVC. And she says, well, I'll have to ask my boyfriend. It's a very awkward conversation.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, jumping ahead a little, we never know if she shows up. Presumably she doesn't, but we never, it's irrelevant. It becomes irrelevant whether she's there or not. Maybe that's intentional.
Maybe it's the first time he finally gets the courage to ask her out is like right after he's been practicing and like kind of has lifted spirits. So maybe it's like him getting back into the drums and like having a purpose of a band that he's going to play with has like lifted him up again to be like, oh, maybe I should pursue this again. Or is it that he realizes that maybe I'm not going to be the greatest, but I'm going to play this show and maybe I can have both things now. Maybe it's not the highest degree, but
yeah, it's not the most important thing in the world. It's not worth forfeiting every other dimension of my life for this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right. I think it was a little perspective. So fast forward, we're at the JVC. He's playing with a band. Andrew's looking good in his black suit. They're all in matching suits. So
yeah.
Fletcher tells him that they're going to be playing the song Whiplash, which is what he used to play at Fletcher or at Schaefer.
Yeah.
And when they get out on stage, before Fletcher goes out to address the crowd, he says, "I know it was you." He says, "Do you think I'm stupid?"
Yeah.
So Fletcher knows that Andrew's the reason Fletcher got fired.
Yeah.
And then they start playing, and it's a song he has no music for, and that he never played before.
Yeah.
And he kind of fumbles through it and makes a complete ass of himself. And you know what's interesting, because I thought was interesting, was Fletcher is so, he talks to several band members throughout the movie about, you'll not sabotage my band. But the interesting thing is he's willing to do it himself.
Yes.
The fact that he's willing to let Andrew completely fuck up that song just to humiliate him.
Yeah.
Again, sociopath.
Yeah.
There is no lesson to be learned here. His intention is not a lesson to be learned here.
Yeah.
Or pushing yourself as hard as you can go. This is just vindictive. And I suppose he does say before they go out that these are people that can change your life with a phone call. Yeah. So I think his idea is if you're gonna bury my career, I'll bury yours.
Yeah.
So Andrew slinks off the stage, and his dad runs back, and he gives him a big hug, and he's crying. And I love the imagery of this, because again, it's his dad is Andrew if Andrew stops trying, if Andrew gives up.
Yeah.
And so he runs into the arms of that reality, of that life. If he gives up, and he hugs him, and it's probably comfortable. Mm-hmm. And then he makes a decision to get back out on stage, and he walks away from that choice to just kind of go into your comfort zone. And he goes back out and he just starts playing. I do love the idea where Fletcher says, we're going to slow it down a little bit. And he just starts blasting music. Is he playing Whiplash?
I don't, no, it was another one that they were doing.
I can't think of it. Right. Yeah, that was it. It was Caravan.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny. It's like, we're going to slow it down. And then he really just bumps into it. And it's funny to see him just like take control. And it's interesting that Fletcher it's interesting that he like allows it after having seeming like he's going to sabotage him, that he's now allowing this. Is it because he's like, oh, maybe he wants people to think that this is how it was planned, or that he just doesn't want to totally shut it down?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but yeah, it's funny to see Andrew take over and then also cue in the bass player and everybody. He's like, it's like now he's conducting this whole thing.
Yeah. This is my stage now. I don't want to get too deep into like details of how this plays out, because us describing it is not doing it any justice. No. I mean, what do you think of this finale? Tell me what you think about this finale.
I've written down that this finale is like more exciting and intense than like the third act of any Marvel movie. I feel like it's more exciting and just more thrilling than that for me. And I could see people maybe feeling like, oh, maybe it goes on too long, but to me it just feels like it builds. The music is building. Like it feels like how you would score the third act of a Marvel movie with all the action going on, but it's literally just the music. And there's really great moments in it where I think it gets so intense and fast that the camera is like doing these whips around to try to catch up with what he's doing with the sticks, that the camera's not even catching up, which I think is very intentional of showing just like how like fast it's moving. It's like he's over here and the camera moves and he's already moved somewhere else. There's like really exciting moments in there.
And I think there's like all those cutaways and close-ups, and like I think it's used very effectively. But I'm thinking, if I'm Damien in his situation, if I was directing this, I would just shoot a shit ton of cutaways. And I think that's what he probably did. Like, we're going to need something. It's funny you say, yeah, I think people think it's too long. And you compared it to like the ending fight scene in like a superhero movie or something.
Yeah.
That's what this is. But I always think, like, if we're talking specifically about fight scenes that are the climax of a movie, or just in general fight scenes, action scenes, the best ones are done with character development inside of them. What keeps them from being boring is and that's why I think if you just take this at face value that Andrew starts playing a song and you could say it is, he plays a song, he plays it really well, and that's it. But this scene escalates. First of all, I wrote down here something very clever. Fletcher has been in control this whole time. Whenever they're on stage or in the bed, Fletcher's been in control. The thing I loved was that Andrew comes out and he just starts playing over Fletcher talking. This is Andrew matching Fletcher's tempo.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
This is Andrew saying, okay, I'm going to walk all over you. This is, I'm in control now. So this is him matching Fletcher's, which I think is probably right out of the gate why Fletcher doesn't just like, and I think you're right. He either wants it to look planned or right out of the gate, he kind of respects that. Like
he's like interested.
The moxie on this kid.
Yeah.
The brass section on this kid to start playing. But there's a lot of great storytelling in this. I think there's a lot of moments, and I don't want to get into too specific. My favorite is the cymbal. I think it's the cymbal. It starts to like fall over on the drum set as Andrew is just doing his solo, and he grabs it. First of all, cut flawlessly.
Yes.
The way he catches it and just lifts it up, and that to me, that's the turning point. That is the moment where these two are on the same page.
I agree. I literally wrote Fletcher fixing Andrew's cymbal is a big turning point. Is one of my notes.
It's quite symbolic, and Josh isn't going to have me next week. He's going to find someone else. But I just thought of that.
Oh, it's so good.
That pun works really well when you're not writing it down. Anyway, but the thing I like about that is I think immediately after Fletcher, that's when Fletcher starts conducting him again, and Andrew lets him. And so I think that is what solidifies this mutual respect.
Yeah.
And it's not, I don't even know how to say it. It's just this idea that Fletcher isn't conducting to control him. He's conducting, they're like to work together. They're getting the best out of each other now, doing this. I do love they cut to a shot during this or a couple shots of his dad watching them. And I think it's because his dad's got this look on his face, like, what is happening? And it's just kind of like, this was never you, buddy.
Yeah.
This is where your path diverged. You chose to stand behind the door, and your son went back out on stage, and you didn't. So,
and there's no shots of the audience either, which I think is not needed, and because it's really just about what's going on between these two guys.
Yeah, and actually, are there many shots of the band? There's a few. I think
there's a few, but not too much, because like really, it really like Caravan. He like kind of kicks them in, and then it almost becomes a big drum solo before. Everybody kind of comes, because you can see Fletcher at one point, he's like conducting Andrew, and then you can see him like getting the rest of the band like, oh, let's do something here.
I thought when I watched that, I think it's a thing where I think Andrew looks like he's getting tired. And so again, this is Fletcher addressing his needs rather than abusing him. He's starting to wind down. Okay, let's support him. Let's support him now. The band needs to come back in to support him so we can finish this off. And I mean, like, how does this end? Like, he finishes his solo, they play it in, they all come, I don't know, there's probably a word for that, where they all like break and it's quiet and their eyes meet. And then they go in for the last note and the band's loud and then it just cuts to black.
Perfect.
And you got to clean up the mess you just made. Cause like, that's fucking fantastic, right? Like
it's amazing. And it's the one thing I really like too, is like, you can, in that moment, they have close-ups like on Fletcher's eyes and you can see like, you see his smile without seeing his face.
Yeah.
Without seeing his mouth. You can see it come up from the bottom of the frame, which is really great. And honestly, like one of the best cut to blacks ever, because typically a movie would have this scene and then it's like, all right, now let's close it all up with another 5 or 10 minutes of what happens after this, what's going on now, let's resolve everything.
Big
this
long denouement.
This is just like boom, that's it, cut to black at this high moment. And even like another like little detail, which is like, no, people don't even think of. A lot of times, like a movie will cut to black sometimes and it'll like hold on that black for like a little bit before the credits start to come up. This is like no nonsense. It's like cut to black, written, directed by Damien Chazelle, comes up like a second later. Yeah. It's like, this is the end. Just such a perfect way, like no fluff on this.
It literally is a stand up and cheer moment.
Yeah.
Like, and the weird thing is when your emotions are in such a good place, I think if you stop and think about it, as far as Fletcher goes, do you give a fuck that this guy got what he wanted? Like, and maybe he didn't. Did he get his new Charlie Parker? I don't know. And that's why this is all very much open into interpretation. And I think a good reason to cut to black of that is where they go from here is really open to interpretation.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just this perfect moment. And you know what? And I think it's worth comparing this movie to like other movies, like big release movies. Like, why does this movie contain all those elements? We talked about, we have people we know that watch more of the mainstream releases. They don't watch as many movies as us, but they watch the mainstream releases. But everyone we've talked to is like, you got to watch this movie. They love it.
Yeah.
And I think it's, like I said, it's that stand up and cheer moment. And some of my favorite movies are the ones that when the credits roll, you want to get up and shout. I always liked, one that I always loved was the very first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, which I haven't seen in a very, very long time.
Same.
First of all, speaking of which, music plays a big part in the ending of that. I love the energy of that movie, but Jack Sparrow gets back on his boat and he just says, I think he says like, "Drink up me hearties, yo ho," and it cuts to black and the music swells.
Yeah,
and you're just like, let's go steal a ship. And but that movie, this Whiplash has that. It has that that moment.
Yeah,
I think one thing that a lot of movies fall flat on, and that is so hard to do, and why this movement works is you earned it. That is the hardest thing to do, and I think it's a thing filmmakers miss a lot. Is you have to earn this. And for something that has absolutely zero fat on it, it earns this big ending, and it's why people talk about it still.
Yeah, I mean, it won the Oscar for best editing. I think to my mind, it's one of the most well-edited movies I've ever seen. Well deserved that Oscar. It was up against American Sniper, Boyhood, Grand Budapest Hotel, Imitation Game. I like all those aside from, I think Boyhood
for editing. It was up against us for editing.
For editing, yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of any of those movies that deserved it.
And it's funny because like a lot of editing, like the years around this, like the movies that normally win best editing are like kind of big things, like Gravity, Mad Max Fury Road. Gravity won the year before, Mad Max Fury Road won the year after. Both very well edited. Hacksaw Ridge after that, which is a great. And then Dunkirk. Yeah. I love all those movies. And then this movie is just in the middle of those. But it's just so well done. I mean, it's up there with, I think, along with The Social Network, which I think is another one of the most well edited movies. Just so well done. And it's funny in like the amount of, like you said, like it was done in like 10 weeks. Just because they wanted to get it to Sundance. And I think I read an article that they polled like 500 filmmakers on the best movies to come out of Sundance. And this was the best movie. This ended up being number one of like the best movie to ever be at Sundance.
Right. I agree.
which totally fair.
Since I'm doing commercial video work right now, I always tell people, a video shouldn't be any longer than it needs to be. And that's true of a movie. Yeah. I do think there's a balance to be struck as a filmmaker, as an artist, you want to put some stuff in there. You want to let stuff breathe. You want to put your own artistic vision in it. You don't, because if you do it too much, your movie becomes kind of textbook. It's almost feels like a blueprint. You got to tell a story. But yeah, this is such a great example of something that it is definitely not any longer than it needs to be. I was reading that they had 19 days to shoot, and I guess entire day of that was spent filming a scene in Fletcher's office that is not in the movie.
Oh, wow.
They lost a whole day of shooting. But good on him. I mean, frankly, if you spent only 19 days shooting a feature film, the inclination would be, let's just put everything in it.
Yeah.
It's interesting because we were kind of talking about a little bit of diminishing returns on Damien's movies, in our opinion. And I don't think La La Land does not have this problem of being overloaded or anything. It might be a hair long. I can't remember. I only saw it once when it came out in the theater, but it is one of those things where as an artist, I get it. And certainly a guy with a lot of talent and a lot of great ideas, when he suddenly has the freedom, because he didn't have this with Whiplash, when he suddenly has the freedom and the budget and the time to like do whatever he wants, now it's hard to reel yourself in.
Yeah.
I saw something that said where Damien was talking about how the short film, they spent 3 days filming, which is the Andrew's first lesson with them, or first practice with them. And when it came to shoot the feature, they only had 2 days to film that scene.
Oh, wow. So that scene, oh my gosh.
Because they had less time. He's like, well, if we did it in 3 days, if we make the feature, I get more. No, you're going to film it in 2. So,
the funny thing about that is like, this movie it was nominated for, I think, 5 Oscars. It was also nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay, even though it's an original story. It's an adapted screenplay because technically it was adapted from the short film, which was technically adapted from his feature script.
Right.
But it also won for sound mixing, which is fair.
Naturally. Best sound mix. And the weird thing is, I as I'm watching this, I'm like, I should say something really profound about the music. I got nothing. And I suppose I'm talking out of my ass to try and pretend I understand jazz. It's incredible. Extremely well done. Very effective. Certainly a case where the music is so much part of the story. And I know people tend to say that, but it's just a score. It's laid over music, but this is like the music really is living and breathing inside this movie because it has to. And certainly credit to Damien. I don't know anything about jazz, and it turns out I don't need to appreciate this movie. I think that's, like we talked at the beginning, it's kind of universal as far as
a good point.
Some people will always find something to relate to with this.
Yeah, I agree. That's kind of how I look at, I mean, we were talking about this before. That's kind of how I look at movies in general. Like, I feel like I tend to be more optimistic on them than you are in cases. If I find something that has like made me think or like that I relate to, like, I feel like I haven't wasted my time. And I mean, this whole movie is, not only is it just entertaining, but it's like brings up a lot of questions on morality of like discipline and things like that. But it's just, there's a lot to think about after this one, and also just to be entertained. Yeah,
this is actually a movie that I struggle to find things wrong with it. And sometimes I feel like often when I text you about a movie, the first thing I tell you is everything I didn't like about it, which to me is just like, I think it's interesting, especially with something I enjoy, is, well, how could this be better? And I got nothing for Whiplash. I don't think this could possibly be any better.
I'm with you.
It's great. One of my favorite movies.
I agree.
Ever. I don't know. You got anything else?
I don't think so. Should have won Best Picture, but that's how it goes.
What did win that year? Do you have it up?
It was the year of Birdman, which is, I mean, who really wants to watch that again? That happens. It's like the Best Picture winner. It's like, it's a few years later. It's like, I don't know about that.
Really? I guess I haven't watched it recently, but I know I've watched it a few times.
I mean, I liked it.
I think Best Picture can be an interesting category because I think some of it should be a lot about the film itself, but I think sometimes it's what did the film achieve or how was it achieved? It's the only reason I didn't get like really angry when the first Avatar was
When it was
was
up for-
nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah.
And there's probably several reasons why that was. But as far as how
Yeah.
that film was made was revolutionary, even
Absolutely.
though it is at best a very average movie.
Yeah.
I mean, I like Birdman. I think what it did is great, but
It's impressive still.
yeah, again, do you take into consider, that's an interesting question. Do you take into the fact that this movie was made for no money? This movie was shot, in 19 days. It was shot and edited in 10 weeks. So it would be ready for Sundance. Like what they achieved to make this movie, I think deserves a lot of recognition, and certainly got it. It's weird because this is a movie that, because it wasn't a financial success, a huge, not like a Paranormal Activity, which was made for like $15 million and then made like 200 million or something.
Yeah.
This wasn't that. This is not a movie that Hollywood learned the wrong lessons from. Nobody's trying to repeat that. This didn't cause a influx of movies about musicians. This was just a movie that kind of did its own thing and did it very well. And
yeah.
Oh, we just have the memories.
Yeah. You can always watch it over and over.
Exactly. And it's a breeze. It's an hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah. That's a big testament.
This movie was already a 10 out of 10 to me, but you can have your bonus points for not being 3 hours long.
Mm-hmm. Under 2 hours these days is big sell.
Big sell. So cool. Well, that's all I got. That's all I got on Whiplash. You got anything else?
Watch it if you haven't. And if you haven't watched it, then we just ruined the whole thing.
In case you missed it, give it a watch.
Yeah.
Like we said, we don't know anyone who's seen it who didn't like it.
And for our next movie, as we're talking about, you'll see we'll talk about spoilers in the movie. So we want to give you a chance to watch the films before listening if you have the chance. So the next film we're doing is Blade Runner 2049, a film by Denis Villeneuve that we both, well, maybe you'll hear if we love it or not. We're both big Denis Villeneuve fans, so we're excited to talk about this one, and we definitely think you should check it out before listening.
Yeah, we're hoping to do these about once a month to start. So we'll do Blade Runner 2049 next. So check it out, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thanks, everybody.